Hey everyone, me again. Whether you've been, at the milsurp collecting hobby for a while or whether you're new, probably aware of how expensive that hobby really is these days. Especially if you're new, you're kind of having to, be forced to decide between getting the cool thing that everybody wants, that all the hype is surrounding, that you see in all the video games and all the movies, and they make ammo for, but it can be fairly expensive. I'm talking about things like M1 Garands and K98s, or you can get some sort of weird hipster gun that nobody cares about, but at least, it's cheaper to get into, but then again, you're going to have a harder time finding ammo or something like that. And people are left hunting for, is there anything that kind of, lives in both worlds at the same time where you get the best of each? And you can search on YouTube for things like the top milsurp rifles under 500, 2020 or 2021. I wouldn't go too much further back than that just because prices do change pretty drastically. But those videos are a really good starting point. I don't take any exception with anything that is suggested in those. But one that really doesn't seem to get mentioned in those is the Spanish M43. So, in case you're unaware, the Spanish M43, that's this bottom one here, is basically a Spanish clone of the K98. It's not an exact copy. For example, you see it has a straight bolt and it has the longer handguard that goes behind the rear sight as well. But other than that, it's that's exactly what it is. It's an 8mm, it's a 98 action. It will accept a K98 bayonet, as you can see here. Now, sometimes you will see them with a little adapter that allows them to use the older 1916 style bayonet. That's what that little that hole you see here is for that pin that holds that in place. Mine is missing that. Not that I particularly care about that, but it is there. So essentially, that's what it is. As the name implies, it was introduced in 1943. It was produced into the 50s. A lot of them did end up being converted to 7.62 by 51 in the form of the FR8, which is what we see above here. Also a really cool gun, but they're a little bit spendier than that typically. So also worth having. These are a little safer than some of the other 7.62 conversion Spanish Mausers just because it is a 98 action, which is a little bit more robust, more safe than a 93. But in any case, back onto the topic of this actual video. And the really neat thing about the M43, of course, is that they're actually still very affordable when you can find them. I paid $250 for this one, and that's 2021 prices to go with my FR8 that I had before that. But in any case, that's what I paid for. Now that may be a little bit unusual, maybe a bit of a stroke of luck. Sometimes you'll see them for more like the low 400, say 400, 425. Maybe 450 even. One word of caution though is these have been available on the primary market lately, but it's the Ethiopian stockpile stuff. It was sold through Royal Tiger and Classic. You know how those go. Basically, they sell out, and they get another batch in. They sell out, get another batch in, etc., etc. Personally, I would avoid those for a few reasons. One is that the quality of the Mausers out of Ethiopia seem to be mostly pretty poor. I know some people have gotten relatively lucky, but I think that's in the minority. Especially considering I couldn't find a single video review of a Spanish Mauser, or especially one of these rather, that was purchased from this Ethiopian stockpile one way or the other. Neither website has any reviews at all, which is a little suspicious because I think that they tend to leave good ones in, scrub bad ones out, and if there aren't any, presumably that would mean there are no good ones. So, and lastly, it's because they ask for $400 for these, which is a little bit on the high end. But honestly, if you end up paying a little more, like even if you end up paying $425 or $450, it is honestly worth it to get a decent bore and not to get a sewer pipe. But I would say these absolutely are worth considering. So, of course, a very natural question you may end up having is, well, why are they so affordable? What's the catch? Is there something going on here? What's the explanation? Again, very proper question. I would say there's a few factors at play here. So first off, I would say that I think a lot of it has to do with when you see the phrase Spanish Mauser, you automatically associate that with the older 93 pattern, the kind of less safe, less robust, although they're probably fine with the right ammo. But people think about that association as well. They think about the kind of debatable conversion to 7.62 by 51 that some of those older guns underwent. So I think that association kind of keeps enthusiasm down. I think there's not really that much enthusiasm for Spanish firearms in general. For instance, I haven't seen too many major YouTubers talk about the M43 at all. in this field. So just not one that there's a lot of enthusiasm around. And of course, Spanish firearms in general don't have the best reputation, especially in the early 20th century. People think about the ruby pistols and there's sketchy patent laws that allow them to make cheap copies, unlicensed copies, I guess I should say, of other things. So that association is a little negative, I think. Do I think that those are fair concerns in this case? I would say mostly not. I mean, to associate it with the 93 pattern, I mean, this is a different gun. It's 98 pattern. I don't know that I'd be too concerned about that. There's not a real reason, I guess, to make that association. As far as quality goes, I think one thing to consider is, since these were adopted in 1943, so this was after the Spanish Civil War, and Spain was more or less neutral in World War II. So they weren't necessarily trying to pump out millions of these, every month, cutting corners and all that kind of stuff. It's peacetime production, so the quality didn't suffer in that regard. So I think it's mostly okay. The one sort of catch that you will encounter, it's both a positive and a negative, is that they're relatively rare. So for instance, a lot of them ended up being converted to the FR8, like we see above here. Not a ton were really made in the first place, so you're not exactly going to be tripping over them at gun shows, which, on one hand is kind of cool because it is something a little bit unusual, kind of uncommon, kind of rare, relatively speaking. But at the same time, you may struggle to find a good price on one, but it is an option out there. I think it's definitely worth considering. It's a really neat gun, and certainly is, in today's world, good deals are hard to come by, and it may be something to look into. I guess really that's about it. Thank you for watching, as always.